Today to try to explain how to use a set plug to set a new gauge or even an old gauge to check it out to make sure it's not worn. This is the ring gauge we're going to be working with. You can see the size, it's a no-go. You can see the adjusting screw if you look very closely in this gap. It is a split ring, which is what's made in the United States mostly today. Very few solid rings are made. There's hard wax on both sides of this adjustment. The adjusting screw, and on this side we've already taken the wax out, and you'll see it's a locking screw. What we're going to do with this, and you see a couple of tools here. I've got a heat gun. You can use a candle, a match, soldering iron, anything to melt the wax. There's my wax right there. The next thing that's important to you is to have a proper setting plug. This happens to be our setting plug. And if you look very closely at this end, you'll see that the crest of the threads are flattened out or truncated. These are full form threads. Pardon the stuff on my fingers. I like to use cotton gloves so as not to get any of my oils oxidation on the plugs, because it will rust them. The truncated part, you can see the size, and you can see it's a no-go. So it fits the ring gauge that we're going to set. There are two types of certification with these. One is a short form certification of compliance, which means that this product was tested in accordance with standards and traceability to NIST. There is also, for those of you that actually need the numbers, a full form, long form certification that you can acquire that gives the exact size, the PDs, and dimensions that you're going to certify your ring gauge to. Because ring gauges, typically manufactured by OEMs like Vermont Gauge here, are certified to the setting plug. So the setting plug should run in there. And in this case, the setting plug goes in. There's a little friction. And it actually does work, so we really wouldn't need to set this. Run it onto the truncated portion. Then I run it onto the full form portion. And you'll feel friction, a couple of pounds of friction. This is correctly set. What you really look for with this is when you're on the truncated portion, and I'm unscrewing this now to the truncated portion, there should be really no perceptible wobble between the ring gauge and the gauge plug itself. If there is wobble, then you have a problem. If there's interference and you can't screw it onto the full form threads, this one works very nicely. That's telling me that the ring gauge is worn and that you're actually starting to impinge on the crest of the thread gauge and the crest and the root of the ring gauge product. So, step one. Step one is to heat this up to take this out. Again, there's a couple different ways to do it. I'm going to use a heat gun. Once you heat it, it needs to set. You don't want to try to set a ring gauge when it's still warm. It wants to be at ambient temperature. So once you take the wax out of the hole, let it set for a while, at least 15-20 minutes, so that it can normalize. It's nice to set it on a granite plate or granite table if you have one where you're working. We now have the adjusting screw available to us. A little bit of wax still in there, we'll get that out. And we have to collapse the ring, it spreads the ring. Okay. I'll let that cool for a little bit. Now, one of the important things when you're trying to make this adjustment, and I need to point this out, this split screw has threads inside and outside and acts to widen the gap, open this up. So as you turn that in and tighten that in, it acts on the assembly. This screw's in place, that's there, to actually open this up and make it looser. If we look at this side will actually close it and lock it. So once you've achieved the feel, which is a very light friction, you can act on the screw, tighten it down, continue to feel it, make sure that you haven't altered it, and you're done. So what we're going to do is going to thread this in. I feel a very light friction. I'm going to thread it in until I reach the face here where I still have truncated threads, but I have all the threads engaged. Now, if I wanted to open it up with less friction, I would turn this. Right now, I think the friction is about right. I'm going to tighten this screw. If I get my screwdriver in there. I'll tighten it, check it again. It feels fine. I don't feel any free play. So from an adjustment standpoint, I'm where I want to be. Now I want to thread this over to the full thread form. I continue to stress that if the gauge has already been worn and you are trying to reset it, if I have high friction going from the truncated threads to the full thread form, your gauge is worn. And what you're doing is you're collapsing it down too much on the PD and you're going to impinge on the crests. Right here, I don't feel any difference between full thread form and truncated thread form. The gauge is essentially set. I'm happy with that. If I had to certify it, I would use my long form cert, which we showed you before. And these dimensions are exactly what these dimensions are set at right now. Last part of this is put the wax in. Now you can either use new wax. In this case I'm going to use old wax. So I'm going to do exactly the reverse procedure that I did before. I'll try to do a little bit of that. We actually cleaned this. It had some oxidation from just sitting on the shelf. A little bit of oxidation, and actually what I did was I used this, Mother's. It's what the OEM uses to clean up gauge faces and things of that nature. This side you can see there's been fingerprints, which is not good because eventually you're going to have rust on it. You get audited, they won't like that. So what you're going to do is you're going to oil it. I keep the sleeves for these gauges, and I kind of keep them in that respect. I'm going to oil this later. I'm going to screw this right back on. It's kind of a protective sleeve. And then I'm going to put it into the protective case that Vermont gives us with these. That's pretty much it. This is brought to you by TheGageStore.com, www.TheGageStore.com. And we'll give you a little commercial there.